Welcome to DRGLT Economics. In this podcast, I want to analyze the calculations of the three major parties in the current military conflict. I want to emphasize the political and economic aspects of these calculations because in my judgment, every war is an economic war, fundamentally. There are people who are a bit more cynical who are saying that every war is a banker's war, but I think it's more like an economic war. Obviously, it is a wiser person would not be doing this type of analysis. A wiser person would stick to the facts and not to speculate too much based on really incomplete information. Nevertheless, since this conflict, this war started over already 40 days ago, I think we already know a lot of information, and these new pieces of information are really conducive already to analyzing some of the original calculations and some of the ongoing updates to those calculations of the three sides. So this is what I'm attempting to do in this podcast. Obviously, the three sides that I will run through are Russia, the United States, and the EU. And I will basically divide today's podcast into three parts, each part really focusing on one of them. Let's start with Russia because Russia is the one that started this episode. I have already discussed in a podcast that I posted probably over 2 weeks ago about my take on the end games of the Russians' plan. I want to emphasize two things, and these 2 points are the premises of my analysis. One, and these are two of the axiomatic points, right? If you disagree with these two, then there is no point in furthering the analysis. First, I want to say that the Russians are not irrational. They made rational calculations based on the information that they have and the interests that they must observe. Second, I want to say that the Russians did not exhaust their political options. And I think few people would argue with the first one. There are, of course, readers of the Daily Hate who would disagree with it because the Daily Hate have speculated that it was something that this military conflict, that this war started because of somebody took too much steroid and it was an episode of roid rage, which is just ridiculous because roid rage does not really. It's not about these serious decisions. It's about physical. It manifests physically, not in making decisions. The second point, I think, it could be a little bit more controversial. A lot of people would say that the Russians have exhausted their political options. I tend to disagree, and let me explain why. I think that the Russia was in a favorable political situation that if Russia continued to play their game, and if necessary, Russia could have throttled their gas and energy and commodity supplies, raw material supplies to Europe, and eventually perhaps even to turn the tap off completely. These were all tools and economic tools, and you could say that those are economic warfare. Yes, but those are tools that are not kinetic, and they can help Russia. They could have helped Russia achieve their political objectives. Now, I'm not saying that having gone through these steps, that Russia certainly would have obtained its political objective. Perhaps not. Very likely not. But then, it is. I would say at that point, then we will have a different reality, right? Once you have exhausted your political options, then you go to war. You don't go to war before you exhaust your political options. Now, there is this discussion which have been pointed out by a lot of people, which is that the Russians, they don't wage war in the same fashion as the Americans, the Westerners, and when they wage war, they consider this military operation as part of the political maneuvers. I think, nevertheless, that it is best to win without fighting a kinetic war, right? It is better to win without fighting, and if you have to fight, you limit it. I think these are some of the mistakes that Russia made, in my judgment. Now, and how do we mitigate these seemingly contradicting points? That the Russian leadership is rational, but at the same time they didn't exhaust their political options. I think, now this is speculation, but I think it is because they had indeed some flawed intelligence. They did not anticipate the level of resistance, the level of resilience in the Ukraine, on the Ukraine side. That is, of course, my take. A lot of people want to dismiss this. They want to say that the Russia's SMO, special military operation, is really proceeding just as planned. I don't really think so. I think the Russians expected something like a repeat of 2014, where a lot of the Ukrainian soldiers would basically either surrender, put down their arms, or even elect to join the Russians. This did not happen for whatever reason, and the Russians made a miscalculation, I think, on this point. Right. And this actually leads me to the second part of today's podcast, which is about the information that they got. Right. In my judgment, they were fed by their human intelligence. Right. They were fed false information. They were misled to believe that a lot of the Ukrainian civilians would welcome them. The administrators would welcome them as liberators, and that the Ukrainian military would not fight, and the few radical forces, regiments, divisions, whatever, armies, they would fight, but that would be a much more limited number. They will be of a much more limited number, and their impact on the battlefield will be less. I think that this information has been fed to them by the United States because the United States has shown itself, in fact, to be really wanting this war. They really want to have this war, and they really want this war to last. They want this war, in my judgment, to last such that, if possible, Russia will be destroyed. It is a war of attrition, but hopefully that the Russian economy will be destroyed, that the Russian political structure would collapse, and that they would then come in to try to divide the country up, and then they will be able to exploit its resources, and they will be able to expose the northern and western flank of China, which is their main primary enemy. It's no longer a competitor, it's no longer an adversary, it's an enemy. But if they cannot destroy Russia, at least they want to bog it down. Basically something very much akin to what happened in Afghanistan in the 1980s. But at the same time, the United States do not want to get involved directly. Although I think they may persuade, order, or induce a lot of the European countries to send troops in. Now, this has been done covertly, clandestinely, but I think if the situation in Ukraine worsens or continues to worsen, at some point, don't count out the possibility that some of the European nations will be sending in their own army. And I'm specifically thinking about certain Central European countries. Now, this, I think, all aims to serve America's main strategic priority, which is the conflict with China. This conflict with China is something that they have settled on. They tried, not half-heartedly, I would say, to split Russia from China, but then they decided that it is better to destroy Russia, and then they will be able to focus on China. A lot of analysts suggest that this act in Russia is led by a lot of the new conservative elements, namely a lot of people who have Ukraine or Russian or Ukraine roots or roots in the Russian Empire, where they were of a certain religious minority, and that their ancestors were persecuted, and this has left a racial hatred that they want to avenge on the Russians. Undeniably, this must be part of the calculations of those individuals. But I tend to give the American establishment a lot more credit. I think that the American establishment agreed on taking this route because they are working against a very tight time schedule. Namely, that, as I have emphasized a couple of times in this podcast, every war is an economic war. And America seems to be, and is expected to, lose the economic war with China. We all know that roughly 7 years ago, the RAND Corporation published a study that suggests that the window of superiority for the United States in the Western Pacific region will close by 2025. That gives it a very tight time schedule. And this, in my judgment, is why America having tried half-heartedly to split Russia from China, decided that perhaps they could do it, but that would take too much time. And perhaps something that is more direct, a little bit more kinetic, perhaps of higher stake, may be necessary and perhaps is the only possible solution. This is a gambit. And a lot of the analysts, especially realists, seem to dismiss the possibility that the United States would win. I don't want to dismiss it. I want to say that the way that things go, it appears that Russia would achieve its political objectives. But the Russian economy could be somewhat weakened, and maybe not, I don't think the Russian political structure would collapse, and I don't think the Russian economy would collapse. But having exhausted its economic, financial, and a lot of the military resources in this conflict, which could last another 6 or even 12 months, Russia would play a lesser role in the next conflict, the main battle that the United States would wage, and would perhaps even not perhaps, but certainly would directly get involved in. In other words, what I'm saying is that in the worst case, for the United States, of course, Russia will be weakened, and perhaps this is just enough. This may just be enough to give the United States the advantage in the conflict that they ultimately seeks. Now let's move to the third party. This is a lesser party, the European Union. In my previous podcasts, I've repeatedly suggested that these were a lot of the politicians are driven by emotion. They're not really rational. And I think let's try to analyze their calculations, right? Perhaps they're not fully rational. But let's try to let's just postulate that they may be rational. If they were rational, what could be a rational position? Why? What is pushing them to take this seemingly suicidal path? I think this has to do with the conflict in Western Pacific. More specifically, the EU understanding that its political, economic, and more importantly, cultural heritage is closely tied to that of the United States. It understands that if the United States is to lose the upcoming conflict, then the global position of the European civilization would basically fall. The privileges that they are enjoying today, such as basically being able to print its currencies, being able to be tightly integrated into America's financial system, which also somewhat benefits them, not to that great extent, but to a certain extent. And also knowing that the Europeans have a different social contract. The European countries have the social contract such that the countries have to run a deficit. They need a way to basically continue to expand their balance sheet. What can, in this situation, they cannot risk having a different system where they no longer have these privileges. And this could undermine not just their economic system, their military alliance, but also their cultural system. Because the society, the social contract between the governed and the governors will basically be destroyed, and then what then comes will be a new system, a completely different system. And that is basically saying that the European Union would disappear. So knowing that this can be existential for at least the European Union, not necessarily, absolutely not for the individual countries, but for the European Union, the political structure, you could argue that it is actually also rational, even though you are betting the house, your child, your wife, and everything on this gambit, and this does not look like it's going to win, but it is possible that you can win. Now, facing with the alternative, which is almost certainty in losing everything. I mean, not saying that the European citizens would lose everything. I'm not saying that the European countries will all disappear, but the European Union, the European political structure can just disintegrate. And those in power may make the calculation that compared to 100% that I will lose everything, I would prefer to bet everything such that I have 10% chance of winning. This perhaps is their calculations. Now, these are all my analysis, if we put a good word on it, or if we put a more straightforward word, to put it more bluntly, all my speculations, all my guesses. A lot of this is guesswork. But I do find this an interesting topic. And of course, I really hope that you can share in the comment section some of your thoughts. Do you agree with what I have just said in this podcast? Are there some things that you think I have missed? And of course, you can also suggest some topics that I can cover in the coming episodes. Thanks for listening and have a great day.